Welcome to those watching via the live stream and those in person at the National Press Club, the place where news happens. I'm Eileen O'Reilly, the president of the National Press Club and the managing editor of Standards and Training at Axios. We're delighted today to welcome acclaimed screenwriter and director Ron Nyswaner as our headliner's newsmaker. Ron wrote his first published screenplay for the 1982 film Smithereens. However, he really cemented his place in the pantheon of Hollywood writers with his powerful screenplay for the groundbreaking 1993 film Philadelphia. His screenplay and the film were nominated for Academy Awards, and Tom Hanks won the Oscar for Best Actor for his role as attorney Andrew Beckett. In Philadelphia, Beckett asks a personal injury attorney, played by Denzel Washington, to help him sue his employers who fired him after they learned he was gay and had AIDS. Philadelphia would not be the last time Rob dealt with a difficult subject in his screenplays. He has often used his craft to advocate for LGBTQ+ rights and tackle homophobia. In his newest project, Showtime's miniseries called Fellow Travelers, Rob reminds us of the toll taken by the Lavender Scare right here in Washington, D.C. This was a decades-long effort by the federal government to push gay people out of civil service, a piece of history often overshadowed by Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare. Fellow Travelers follows two fictional men, State Department employee and war hero Hawk Fuller and idealistic Senate aide Jim Laughlin, as they navigate their relationship over 3 decades while history swirls around them. We are delighted to have Ron here with us today to talk more about the role of entertainment and media as a catalyst for social issues. Ron, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Eileen. Really excited to be here. My show, Fellow Travelers, is set primarily in Washington, and we shot it almost exclusively in Toronto. We did 2 days in Richmond, and I think there's a bit of special effects. My other fond association with Washington, I spent 3 years writing for Homeland. And we would come here at the beginning of every season to consult. And we met very discreetly with FBI agents and CIA officers, a national security advisor, a Russian defector, an ambassador. And we had to be very careful about that they didn't cross paths as they were arriving and departing from our meeting place. It was suggested today that the theme of our conversation is media that provokes questions. And more specifically, and I'll just read this, my passion for intricately drawn characters and subjects that provoke discussion. So, I read that and I thought, is that what I do? Because I certainly don't start the morning in the writer's room saying, let's get into those intricate characters, guys, and let's make sure we provoke some discussion. But, I thought about it a bit, and I think it might be the end result of what I do. But it's certainly not where I start. Where I start is where I think most writers start, which is this gut instinct that I have honed after many years doing what I do. And it's that feeling that responds to some piece of information or maybe a story you've overheard somebody say, and you're saying, your gut says, that could be a story. And it's this thing, and I try to explain it to the younger writers I work with, but there is this gut thing. Then you have to then craft the story, you have to make it. But that's where I start. But that sort of leads us, if I'm going to, that could make a good story, then have to define what's a good story. So when I teach a masterclass in film and television writing, I don't know why we call it a masterclass, it sounds so pretentious, it's a class. Especially if the room is filled with bunch of young, hopeful filmmakers, I'll say something like, well, what I do is I teach that there are 8 questions or 8 elements of a good story, but I phrase them as questions. And I'll say, these are the 8 questions that I ask myself to determine if a story is worthy of occupying my time and my mind for the next 2, 3, 4, or, as in the case of Fellow Travelers, 11 years. Because that's how long it can take to get things made, or they just might not get made at all. And when I say that to a group of young filmmakers, I just love the expression on their faces, which is pure terror. They're like stunned. 2 years, 5 years, 11 years, and I'm like, yeah, you want to be a writer? Be afraid. Be very afraid. It's not always easy, but it's usually fun. So I think what's relevant to today's conversation is one of those questions that I ask myself: where will this story take me? What world will I get to explore if I pursue this story? And it's entering this world that leads me to the characters and subjects that might provoke discussion. In Philadelphia, in the early days of the AIDS crisis, a lawyer with AIDS sues his law firm for discrimination. Lawyers suing lawyers. I'll go there. Soldier's Girl, a movie I wrote for Showtime many years ago. In the early, at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a soldier is murdered by his roommate, and that soldier happens to be dating off base a transgender woman named Calpurnia Adams. Yeah, I'll go there. I made a true crime documentary called, a series called Murder on Middle Beach for HBO, in which a young man is investigating the murder of his mother, and the 4 suspects are his father, his sister, and 2 of his aunts. I'll go there. And with Fellow Travelers, we have 2 completely different men with opposing worldviews, and they fall in love. In Washington, D.C., in the McCarthy era, when homosexuals are being purged from the government and their lives are being destroyed. I'll go there, definitely. So the gift, my gut instinct is automatically engaged because I start asking questions when I get that germ of a story. And if I'm asking questions, then maybe the byproduct is the audience is asking questions. I'm inviting the audience to align with the characters as they struggle, debate, question their beliefs, their principles, their moral choices. And that's how we engage an audience. But I believe that engagement is deeper if I can move an audience. When we had the first preview of Philadelphia in a Baltimore suburb at a multiplex, people coming to maybe see, Die Hard 4, and we're passing out these things. You want to see Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington in a new movie, and they come in, and there are 400 people sitting there, and I sit with them. It's the first time we've screened the movie outside of our little circle. And it's received in silence. I'm sitting there with 400 people, and as we're getting to the scene, if you remember, when Tom Hanks recites the libretto of an opera aria that's being sung by Maria Callas, I thought, oh, great, Ron. These people came to see Die Hard, and you're now going to read an opera to them. What else can you do for a living, because your career is obviously over? And then I heard this weird sound, like some mechanical wheezing, and I thought, oh, that's great. This is God's honest truth. Just what I need. The ventilation system is breaking down. There's something going on. But I looked around, and people were weeping. And I thought, wow, how did that happen? And we had a focus group afterwards, and some man in the focus group said, I don't think I know anybody who's gay. And I wanted to say, dude, you do. They just haven't told you yet. And I don't know anybody who has AIDS. But I think your movie is saying that the only sin in the world is hatred. I thought, wow. Now, that was a byproduct of what we did to make that movie. It's not what our intention was. On Fellow Travelers, I insisted that in the show that we allow our characters to be flawed. Eileen, you mentioned that to me earlier. We had a rule. There are no noble victims in Fellow Travelers. And that's something that I have been struggling with, that when people present things to me with LGBTQ characters, they're limited often to the role of victims of repression. And can you imagine saying to an actor, hey, you know what your character is? You're a victim of repression. Now act. And I can't write that. I don't know how. I don't know what that. How can I write that character? So I sometimes wonder and have said, why do only straight characters get to be Walter White or Don Draper, or every horrible person on Succession? Why can't we get those roles? And so I hope with Fellow Travelers we have. You know, I was interviewed by Steve Mason recently, the ESPN sportscaster, journalist. He loves the show. And he pointed out that with Roy Cohn, the character of Roy Cohn, there's a moment in the show when Roy Cohn is rejected by David Shine. He said, you know, Ron, he's such an evil character. I know that he was almost apologizing. He said, but you know, for a moment, I felt like a glimmer of his humanity. Yeah, because he's a human being. You know, I expect some people will have trouble with that. As a matter of fact, I had someone say to me, he wasn't a human being, he was a monster. But he was a human being. And human beings often do evil things to each other. And that's one of the great questions we could ask, and do ask. Why do human beings do evil things to other human beings? That question only works if you don't turn that person into a cartoon. And we had other rules in the writer's room. There were certain things that I didn't want to hear the writers say. I'm probably going to get in trouble. But the one word was trigger. Unless you're talking about Roy Rogers' horse, we're not going to talk about trigger. Trauma was another one, because I think there are just these sort of easy ways that people use to sort of describe a character. But the main rule I said is no one in my show is going to speak their truth. Don't use that phrase. This is the moment when someone speaks their truth. Because for me, people who walk around speaking their truth are boring or dangerous. You know, I believe that human beings don't know their truth, that we're looking for it. And our characters in Fellow Travelers, they're stumbling in the dark. They're looking for the truth. And we invite the audience to look with them. And that's what we try to do. So thank you, and look forward to talking more.
Thanks, Ron.
My pleasure.
You almost sound like a journalist, asking all those questions and seeking truth.
Well, I think, you know, I am. Especially since I work a lot in what we call historical fiction. Mm-hmm. You know, things based on true stories. And, you know, that has been an interesting, you know, or Philadelphia, which is, you know, not any one real person's particular story, but is certainly the story of what was happening in our time. Mm-hmm. You know, and I kind of think that's our mission here, you know, so that we leave a record of what was happening in the time in which we lived. You know, otherwise, really, what's the point?
Right. Can you dive into that a little bit more? Because I know you intertwined fictional characters with real history.
Yes.
So how did that, you know, process work?
It's tough.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
First of all, Thomas Mallon wrote a beautiful novel that the show is based on, and he does it really well. He's a very, very knowledgeable writer. We did expand the novel, which is set mostly in the 50s, almost exclusively in the 50s. Exclusively in the 50s. Mm-hmm. We expanded into the 60s and 70s and 80s because I wanted to sort of explore my history as a gay man who, I wasn't around for the Lavender Scare, I'm not that old, but I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s. I came out of the closet in 1977, 78. And I thought, well, this is my chance to sort of explore that history and take these characters, all these characters, the 5 main characters, you know, that go through that history together. So our rule, you can tell, I have a lot of rules. One of the rules that we had was that everything that, say, the historical figures, say McCarthy and Cohn, that they say in public, they actually have to have said. And we are about to shoot the opening, for those of you who've seen the show opens, Hawk and Tim meet at a big rally when Eisenhower has won the presidency in a landslide, and McCarthy has also been reelected, and McCarthy shows up, and we're in this hotel room, we're going to be shooting all night, we have 200 extras, it's a huge, expensive scene, and I realize, and Chris Bauer playing Joe McCarthy is like walking up to the stage, we're blocking it, and I realize I didn't write anything for him to say when he takes the stage. Like, how did I do that? So I called my researcher, who's in LA, thankfully, because he was 3 hours earlier, because it was probably 1 in the morning. I said, Lewis, I need something for McCarthy to say when he takes the stage at the opening at this rally, and I need it in 15 minutes. And I got a call. He said, Ron, get ready. And because we found an actual speech that Joe McCarthy made that very evening in which he uses the phrase fellow travelers. And it's in there. And I thought that, okay, well, God's on my side, actually. So that's what we do. That's one way. And every historical event in the show is based in some historical fact. So we don't just sort of, because of our imagination, say, let's accuse Joe McCarthy of being a sexual assaulter. There are plenty of instances where people related stories where those things that happened. As a matter of fact, we found a letter that a Navy corporal wrote to a congressman and said exactly what our character in episode 3 says, I was sodomized by Joe McCarthy. Now, so some people said that was the work of his enemies, trying to smear him, but we found the letter. So we tried to be that meticulous in all of our historical facts.
That's amazing. How much research did that involve and how much time? I think you mentioned 11 years.
Well, yeah, I wasn't working, I had to make a living. So I wasn't working steadily on Fellow Travelers for 11 years. I became interested in it. I pitched it to somebody who bought the options novel for me 11 years ago, but I went off and did other things. But in terms of, I've been researching this 4 years, as a matter of fact, and Lewis, our researcher, was hired at the beginning of the writer's room, even though we'd all done, I've read Demagogue and the Citizen Cohn and all the great books by then. But he started in the writer's room, and other than myself, he was the longest employed crew member on our show. I lasted 1 more week than Lewis did, because everything had to be. I mean, the directors and I would walk around the crowd scenes, and I'd say, "Are you wearing your own glasses, like from the 2000s?" Like, no. You take those glasses off. We were we noticed that people didn't know how to smoke cigarettes. Everyone in the 50s smoked. And so you're handing out these fake cigarettes, and we noticed, we're watching them, they're like, so we would go around, and I would say, "Do you smoke? You don't? Give me back those cigarettes." So we were down to every detail.
That's amazing.
I mean, I'll just say one more thing.
Yeah.
The beautiful sets, if you see our show, they're all built. So that Senate, the executive offices for the Senate, there are these lights, and they are the actual lights. I mean, not the actual ones. They are replicas of the actual lights that are in the Senate, in the Rayburn building. Rayburn, is it Rayburn? The Rayburn building. And they were actually, because we couldn't find them anywhere, my production designer said to me, "Oh, they're all hand blown." And I thought, don't tell actually the executives that, okay? We won't mention that fact.
I love the settings.
The sets are beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Did you have when you were pulling it all together, were there any big surprises for you or anything that stuck out in your head that you're like, wow, I didn't realize this happened back then?
Well, you mean in terms of the historical facts? Mm-hmm. I was utterly fascinated by the story of Roy Cohn and David Shine. And again, that whole plot is absolutely based on history, that Robert Kennedy, who was also a lawyer on Joseph McCarthy's Senate committee, hated Roy Cohn. And so a reporter had asked, like our reporter character Marcus asks, Roy Cohn and David Shine a question about, if you hate commies so much, why aren't you in Korea shooting them? And that reporter got in trouble, and that reporter so it's all there, did research and gave it to Robert Kennedy and said, "David Shine, there's something wrong with his draft status." And that led to David Shine being drafted, and that led to Roy Cohn insisting on all these favors, again, all historically based. He has to have, he should have every weekend off. He doesn't have to live on base, he can live at the Waldorf Astoria. Et cetera, et cetera. And finally the Army saying no, and Roy Cohn saying, they said, "Mr. Cohn, we're the Army, and we don't take orders from you." And Roy Cohn said, as it's in our show, "I will destroy you. I will find commies everywhere I can." And so then they focused their attention on Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, where Julius Rosenberg had worked. And they found, amazingly, all these secret communists. And then that leads to the Army McCarthy hearings. And one of the things that we posit, again, all the things that take place in private between our historical characters are, our imaginations, but we researched imaginations. So we posit that, and I think actually there's a really valid way to say this, that the downfall of Joe McCarthy, we often think about the Army McCarthy hearings, and we think about that great moment when Joseph Welch says, "Have you no decency, sir, at long last, have you no decency?" I don't think that was the moment that caused his downfall. I think the moment was the day that we have in our show, where McCarthy refers to something as a pixie. And McCarthy is sitting next to Cohn, and McCarthy's trying to get through the moment and says, "Can you define a pixie, sir?" And Joseph Welch says, "I think a pixie is a close relative of a fairy." And Cohn and McCarthy are sitting next to each other. That, I believe, is the downfall of McCarthy, and I think I can argue that, I think with a lot of research behind that, which means, and in our historical fiction, our homosexual main character, Hawk, has kind of engineered, that's total fiction, we don't know, has engineered that McCarthy can't fire Cohn because Hawk has given Cohn something to blackmail McCarthy with. That we have created, that little plot, because we need our main characters to be involved with history. But I do believe that, as odd as it is to say it, homophobia caused McCarthy and Cohn's downfall. Now, I don't say that so that we have sympathy for them, like good. We're glad that they were defeated. Demagogues should be defeated. And I say that in the context of the world we're living in right now. And I doubt that a simple little blackmail plot will do it. I'm hoping and praying that the rule of law will prevail, and the demagogue who is yearning to come back and take over our country and never leave the Oval Office, that he will be defeated before he gets a chance. That was my little rant, sorry. But the show, and by the way, McCarthy is in many ways a model for the person whose name I do not speak, who used to be the President of the United States. And Roy Cohn, protege of Joe McCarthy, was a mentor to that president. And I think Cohn taught McCarthy, what's his name? The dude from Queens, yeah. Everything he knows about never telling the truth, you don't have to, and when you're attacked, just attack back. Mm-hmm. And that's how Roy got through life.
Yeah, I definitely see similarities. So for the Lavender Scare, how does that resonate with modern audiences?
Well, I didn't know that much about it, so I was shocked when I started reading. There's a great book called The Lavender Scare, which I suggest everybody read. And unfortunately, the author's names, who I at the moment I can't remember. But it was fascinating to me. Again, everything that's in our show is true. The FBI went to people's apartments. They opened their drawers. They looked at their underwear. They wrote letters to their families saying, "Your son or daughter is being investigated as a sexual deviant." At one point, there's a line that we have in the show which came from a record. They were interviewing people who had worked in the notorious M Unit at the State Department, where people were brought in, and people said, that can't possibly be true. They asked Matt Bomer, playing Hawkins Fuller, to get up and walk across the room. Yes, they did, because men walked a certain way if they were real men. They asked him to read a section from Somerset Maugham's novel, because Somerset Maugham was notoriously gay. And that's all true. And there's a line in the show that comes from the record where somebody says, the only thing that disturbs me about my work at the M Unit is that we saw about one suicide a week. And we had one man leave our office, and he shot himself in the head on the sidewalk outside the building. And we have something like that happens in our show. So that we do feel the oppression, the pushback, and there's always pushback to progress, isn't there? That's happening right now in terms of LGBTQ rights. We certainly feel it. I do hear sometimes people say, "Oh God, it's worse than ever." It's not. It's not worse than ever. We have made progress, and if we forget that we can make progress by struggling and fighting, then we're doomed. And what I believe is that we have to have joy in the struggle. And we talk a lot about the serious things about fellow travelers, but just for those of us, it's just to pitch it a little bit to people who might be watching and haven't seen it yet, is that I think there's a lot of joy in fellow travelers. There's joy in loving somebody. There's joy in having really hot, provocative sex. There's joy, and they found a way to dance and make music and have a culture, despite the fact that they could go to jail and have their lives destroyed at any moment. And that's, I think, important to remember.
Yeah, you can see that when you watch the show.
Good.
Sure. Someone asked, how do you cast Matt Bomer and Jonathan Bailey and Jelani Aladdin?
Well, Matt came onto the project very early on because, I've always loved him as an actor. Robbie Rogers, my great producer, is friends with Matt. So 3 years before the show was made, Matt signs on as an executive producer. And what that means is, we're saying, we might get the green light, please don't take a role in Barbie. Please, 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 and he, anyway, he didn't. And he was available when we needed him. And he's a great executive producer as well. And Johnny actually reached out to us, to Robbie Rogers, before the show was greenlit, and said basically his manager said, Johnny will do anything to be part of Fellow Travelers. He had somehow gotten hold of the script. And so we were like, well, he actually doesn't have to do much except, show up. Because we were thrilled with that. And I have to say, we did a chemistry read, where you sort of like, well, let's just see how Matt and Johnny interact together. And it was on Zoom. And Matt was in LA and Johnny was in London. And we're all watching on Zoom. And they were like on Zoom. And they're like pretending to sit on that park bench next to each other, but they're on Zoom in different continents. And it was extraordinary. I actually had an executive write and say, I've never cried in a chemistry read before. And so it was natural. And Jelani, we auditioned Jelani. And Jelani, the first thing Jelani said to us when we had our conversation was, you don't know me, but you wrote me. And and that actually really kind of threw me, especially as I've talked to some people before, as a white creator showrunner, I am sensitive to, and I think we all should be sensitive to, is like, I can't own, I don't dare, and I shouldn't try to own a black character's story. But, there were no black characters in the novel, and I just thought, I can't make a show in 2022, 23 that has an all-white cast. I'm just not going to do it. And so we created Marcus out of whole cloth, and Jelani came on, and, and I'll say one more thing about casting. You can't ask. So you can't say to the agent, like, Ron and Robbie and Dan are really interested in casting LGBTQ actors for the roles. Is your client LGBTQ? You can't ask that question. But Robbie, who's married to Greg Berlanti, and they're very, very well known in the gay community, Robbie would go on Instagram, and he would say, oh, he's following me, he's gay. So we did our behind the scenes research. And I have to say, the cast also includes Noah Ricketts and Allison Williams, and they play, those 5 people we follow for the same, for 35 decades.
That's awesome.
Not 35 decades, 35 years, 3.5 decades.
I was going to say.
Yes, there's a whole science fiction element you guys haven't seen yet. Yeah, they get this elixir of eternal life, and
Time travelers.
It's amazing. Actually, it's so fun. I know there's a time pressure, but I do have to say that there was a crew member who was just hired for a week because somebody was out, and he was on the van going to take the crew back to the lunch van, and he was on a phone talking to a friend. He said, yeah, I'm on this show called Fellow Travelers. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I think it's about gay time travelers. So we were joking, like, yes, you go to the men's room in Lafayette Park, and you go to the 3rd stall on the left, and boom, you're in a vortex that takes you to another decade. Which is not a bad idea for a show, in a way.
Yeah, part 2. So you've spoken about balancing facts versus story in Fellow Travelers. Can you speak to how you made the decision of what facts to include or leave out?
Well, you include what tells the story that you're trying to tell? And you know, that actually it's a really good question. We could talk a long time because, you know, I mean, I have stacks and stacks and stacks of research, and just, you know, there's a whole mini-series to be done just about the Lavender Scare. There's an incredible mini-series just to be done about the rise of Joe McCarthy, you know, but you have to hold on to what is the story you're telling. So at the essence of our story is that we have this love story, you know, this unfulfilled, not happy, troubled, volatile, passionate love story, and that is the anchor. And you have to hold on to that as you create television, especially multiple episodic television. There has to be that thing, you know, on Homeland, you know, and most people watch it. We have a lot of fans from Washington, usually, when I mention Homeland. You know, in the end, you know, you couldn't be away from Carrie too long. You know, Carrie is our anchor, you know, and we have to, you know, hold on to that anchor.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of the love story, I think you mentioned something about love being dangerous. What does that mean? And
as a matter of fact, yes, the marketing motto, the marketing tag actually in a lot of the early posters was "Love is dangerous," and it was something I suggested. Well, love is dangerous, Eileen. I mean, you know, and that was something else that we talked about a lot on the set. It wasn't just dangerous because McCarthy and Cohn and or the people who thought AIDS was God's, you know, sort of punishment, because they were sort of oppressing us. As far as I'm concerned, if I risk loving somebody, I'm taking a risk. I can be hurt. I can be betrayed. I can lose that person. You know, and so I would say again on the set, we have all felt loss. We have all felt grief. We've all been in love. We felt the joy of that. So let's, you know, we're trying to sort of go beyond our identity, you know, and sort of make those very human things. So, but I think any human being who's ever been in love can tell you it's a pretty dangerous thing to do.
Yeah. So someone wrote in, the Lavender Scare actually lasted longer than the Red Scare, the attempt to root out alleged communists from the government, yet it has received far less attention. Why do you think that is?
I think, is the answer obvious? No offense, but I think, you know, I think that it has taken us a while to view LGBTQ people as full members of our society. And, you know, we've been fighting for our rights to be that for a long time. And so I think it's taken just as long for, you know, media and television, movies, and art and culture to embrace them as full-fledged characters. So I think, and you know, that as part of what I have tried to do over the last, 3.5 decades, just like the time span and fellow travelers, you know, is sort of get to that LGBTQ history and, you know, put it out there a little bit. Also because there are fascinating stories in it, which I care about primarily. But I think that that's part of what I've been doing, and somewhat successfully, I hope.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your personal life has affected your writing? And
Yeah, yes, I can. Because part of what I teach is among those questions the 8 questions, the last one is, where am I in this story that I want to tell? And that certainly doesn't mean that I'm going to write about an aging, but still attractive, you know, TV writer, God forbid. You know, or I'm going to write about myself, but it's that, where am I? And, you know, somebody on the set turned to me. It was one of the DPs, and had been working on this show for a while, and he said, I think you are half Hawk and half Tim. I said, well, you got it. I don't need to go to therapy anymore, man. You nailed it. You know, and that, and certainly I would say in many ways, and I just actually wrote, I'm learning about social media, folks. So I just did a post yesterday about Tim and religion, and I talk about my personal life. And I was, you know, in the 70s, I was a Jesus freak. I was a born-again Christian. I spoke in tongues. I actually was taught how to speak in tongues by this gorgeous hunk of a guy. And that, I think, was not irrelevant. And, but I was also, and it's, you know, it's interesting when I think about it, I was, you know, it was before the culture wars. It was before Christianity was so aligned with repressive right-wing politics. You know, I was in 10th grade against the Vietnam War. I was wearing a McGovern Shriver pin. So like the bullies in my school didn't know, should we beat him up because he's like a liberal, or should we beat him up because he's this crazy Jesus freak and kind of a sissy? So like they had, I gave them lots of options actually. So that's one way, you know, and I took that, you know, and talked to Johnny specifically about, you know, the search for ecstasy, whether, you know, whether one finds it in sex or one finds it in a certain kind of prayer and religion. You know, and I don't think that's a bad thing, or in drugs. And there's also, which hasn't been aired yet, episode 7, it's Fire Island in 1979, guys. So a lot of dancing, a lot of Donna Summer, a lot of drugs, and we've said the sex has been provocative. We prove it in episode 7. It's also the weekend of the White Night Riots in San Francisco, and we go through those two things. But Hawk has developed. Hawk is becoming an alcoholic and a drug addict, and I am happily recovered many years from a very, very serious, very nearly fatal drug addiction, and I'm happy to survive. But actually, that made its way into the show.
Right. You wrote about that in your book, too.
I did.
That's good. There's so many questions here. Sorry. So I guess maybe we should talk about how the AIDS epidemic impacted your writing as well, because that had a big influence on the whole.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, it changed my life in so many ways. Mm-hmm. You know, it was to come, you know, out of that the world that I just described. You know, coming out in '78 and '79, and just, you know, being free to have partners and free to dance and just celebrate being gay. To then, you know, almost immediately it felt like, you know, that now there was this disease that was killing people for the very things that were giving us joy. And that had a profound impact on my life. I mean, obviously on my personal life because of the people that I lost, but certainly on my professional life, you know, with Philadelphia. And Philadelphia, I think, was the first time that we wrote something where the conversation about it was not what I described earlier about why I start doing something. That conversation was a bit reverse. And Jonathan Demme called me, and Jonathan Demme gave me my career. He found a script of mine in film school 5 years or so before Philadelphia, and basically called me and said, I'm going to option your script, you're going to go to Hollywood, I'm going to give you my agent, and he gave me my career. And then about 5 years later, he called me and said, my best friend is dying of AIDS. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I get very emotional when I talk about Jonathan, because he changed my life, and we lost him a few years ago. Anyway, and he said, I don't know what to do, Ron. The only thing I know how to do is make a movie. Would you make a movie with me? And I said, sure. And, you know, we took a few years to, you know, to again create that story. So that came from a very personal place or kind of a message place, like, let's make a movie about this thing that we wanted people to talk about. But Jonathan said, very wisely, I think, and Jonathan, if you remember, followed his career, Stops Making Sense has just been re-released. Jonathan was kind of the king of the indie art film. So he did those movies with Spalding Gray, Swimming to Cambodia. But Jonathan said, let's make, and we could have done that. We could have made the art film. But Jonathan said, here's what we should do. Let's make a movie that plays at the Mall Cineplex and has the widest possible audience. Let's talk to the people who don't think the way we do about AIDS, about homosexual rights. Let's talk to the people who don't think that way. And let's see what happens. And, you know, and I have to say, you know, I think we succeeded. You know, somebody wrote to me from a former student of mine was like, had gone to somewhere, I think it was in Virginia or Kentucky. He'd gone to the mall to see the movie, and he said, Ron, I just want to write you and tell you that this straight couple was coming out, and they were going to their pickup truck after the movie, and the guy was crying, and he heard his partner say, I told you you'd like it. So I don't think he had to be, roped into going to see this movie about this gay guy with AIDS, but it did affect him in some way.
Yeah, I think that movie was transformative. So with Philadelphia and Soldier's Girl, how has the treatment for LGBTQ plus communities changed, and what do you see as the big victories of the past 20, 30 years?
Well, in terms of culture, it's what was that famous line? Gay love used. There was one point in time what was called the love that dare not speak its name, and some critic, was it John Simon, said, it's now the love that will not shut up. It's still, I know that there were years when I'd say and I'd be pitching something, I'd say blah, 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 detective, blah, 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 I think he's gay. And they'd say, well, that's great, we're interested. Yeah, we're interested, because I have a gay friend. Or they might be, I'm gay, and they'd say, but why? Why is he gay? And I wanted to say, maybe I did, so if he was straight, would you ask, why is he straight? Mm-hmm. But I think that has passed. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, Ann Bitterman, who created Ray Donovan, the first iteration, Ray's son was going to be gay, and when she pitched it to Showtime, this is probably 10 years ago, so they said, oh, please don't make the son gay. Every son in every child in all of our shows is gay. Right now, we have too many gay children. So there's progress, but I think, to me, it's not representation is not a goal of mine. Great stories is what I aim for. Do you know what I mean? So I think that that's what the burden in some ways is on those of us who are LGBTQ artists to make and create great things that are undeniable. Mm-hmm. We had, and I was once told a few years ago by somebody, an influential executive, who said, no one will ever make Fellow Travelers. It's political, it's period, it's gay. And then when we eventually pitched it, we had multiple, you get the call from your producer who says, we have multiple offers. So that's that's where you want to be. And it came at the right time. And in some ways it was, with Matt attached, it was undeniable in some ways. So I think that's the onus. Actually, it's also the onus on people making art about non-LGBTQ people. It has to be, it's so competitive out there, it has to be undeniable in some ways. And I know we see so much mediocre stuff when we say, was that undeniable? But somehow it was to whoever greenlit it. So we have to keep doing that.
I love that. Okay, to get back to the AIDS epidemic, we just recognized World AIDS Day, and it couldn't be more different today than 20 years ago. While drug therapies have been very successful, Dr. Fauci says that they're still aiming for an HIV vaccine. You mentioned a concern that people are going to forget about the AIDS epidemic, similar to how they've forgotten the lavender scare. What do you mean by this? Are we doing enough? If not, what else needs to be done?
It's hard for me to respond to that question about what more needs to be done, because I sort of try not to talk about things that I am not qualified to talk about. Right. But I did know that when we were creating Fellow Travelers that I had to explain to people. I mean, really interesting to explain to young actors in the 50s. And again, I wasn't a out gay man in the 50s, but I knew I had grown up even in the 60s and the 70s. And as I said in my pitch, I didn't hear the word homosexual spoken aloud until I went to college. Mm. There were no gay characters in books, on TV, in films, but there were no conversations about gay people. There was I was unspeakable. That's what I grew up believing, with this thing inside me that I'm not quite sure what it is, but I know that the cheerleader does nothing for me, but the football player does, when I see them. So like, what is it? What is that thing? Well, it's unspeakable. It's not just bad. It is so evil that no one ever talks about it. And so I try to explain that mentality to people who, they come and say, well, like my characters say, I know they're eventually going to find their lesbian identity. Nobody in the 50s had a lesbian identity, or a gay identity. There were places where you go and meet other gay people, but there was not this culture, this whole way of looking at life. So that didn't exist. And then again, when the 80s, to explain to people, because there was a little bit of fear about some people that, focusing on AIDS, and actually I just read somebody said something about A Fellow Travelers is turning into tragedy porn. Make drama about happy people. Good luck. Hey, come over for dinner, great. So nice seeing you last night. I love you. I love you too, let's get married. So there was to explain to younger people. Somebody were worried that we were being negative about sex because we're, that there are two people, spoiler alert, in the 80s that are HIV positive, who have AIDS, and they're not going to live. And there was worry. That's negative. We're sending a negative message. And I, as I sometimes did on a rant, as you've seen, I said, stop. If you were a gay man living in San Francisco in the early 1980s, good chances you had AIDS. If you had AIDS, you were going to die. That was a fact. And you were going to die because the government didn't care about you. You were expendable. We are not, and there had been talk about let's not make people uncomfortable about sex. And I said, if that makes people uncomfortable, so be it. By the way, art is supposed to make people uncomfortable. If your art is making people comfortable, you need to think about being an artist. Art should provoke. It should make people say like, oh, I don't know. Like somebody said, it's tragedy porn. There are all these sad things happening. You know what, friend? Whoever wrote that, you have my life. You get born in 1956, and let's start this all over. And you see how I have had to struggle to sit up here comfortably in front of you, at this point. So it's not tragedy, it's struggle. And there's joy in struggle. I like struggling. Maybe you get a sense, I like a fight, and all my producers and executives will tell you that fact. They'll vouch for me. Ron likes a fight. But that's it. So I don't even know what the question was now. But anyway, we have to remember it. Mm-hmm. We have to remember it. That's one thing to do. And something I'm really proud of the show. At the end, when every episode goes to black and you see the credits, and every song, and all 8 episodes except for episode 2, and I'll explain that, is by an LGBTQ artist who died of AIDS. Arthur Russell, Stephen Grossman, Klaus Nomi, Sylvester, Michael Callan. Episode 7, those of you who knew the AIDS struggle, Michael Callan was a great AIDS activist, a great musician. Please, when you watch the show, please do not turn it off at the black credit. And now that they're doing this thing where it goes to the next episode automatically, stop it. Listen to those songs. We worked really hard to get the rights to all those songs and to honor these LGBTQ artists who are gone. I mean, Michael Callan was a young, vital, beautiful man who was really instrumental in helping us conquer, to become not only not the people who were trying to storming the CDC, but eventually sitting down at the table with Dr. Fauci to help figuring out, how to save lives with AIDS. And so listen, if you watch episode 7, please listen to a song at the end. And that's something that we really wanted to do, that these people have to be remembered. They were young and vital in the art that we've lost.
Yeah. I'm going to re-listen to them now.
Yeah,
I didn't
please.
realize that. That's awesome. Someone asked, how did you manage to create the All right, can't read that. Create the emotional roller coaster for 6 episodes so far. And can we have a happy ending?
Second question first, no. But you know, I'll address that. Mm-hmm. Being moved is happy. You know, one of my favorite movies as a kid was The Way We Were, right? Streisand and Redford, and at the end they can't be together, and they have the amazing scene at the end, and she touches his hair, and he says, you know, I can't bring my girlfriend over like for a drink, and she says, I know, I'll never see you again. And like, you know, I wept as a kid. I probably got beat up for that too. You know, that's being moved is a beautiful cathartic experience to have. So it's not about happy or sad. Sad art is great. Like, you know, we love sad art. You know, I think a good cry actually is good for all of us. So I don't know what the first part of the question is, but the ending will be, I'm not going to spoil it, but I don't know if it would be happy unless people sort of getting to know themselves a little bit better and understanding something about themselves. But there's no resolution. That was another rule. Like, no resolution. No, don't resolve it. You know, we don't resolve things, you know, because again, in life, things are rarely resolved.
Very true. I think part of the question was, you know, what the roller coaster's been like for you and the different episodes so far.
Well, I think, how did we create that? I mean, life created it. The stories that we were telling, you know. And I have to say, where Homeland, you know, I brought rules from Homeland to fellow travelers. You know, in Homeland, a scene doesn't exist if it doesn't move the story forward. Mm-hmm. And that was a rule in fellow travelers. Every scene has to move the story forward, especially the sex scenes. The sex scenes have to move the story forward. You know, it wasn't like we're 20 minutes in and let's take off some clothes because, you know, that gets, you know, the big bump in the ratings and social media. You know, it was how we move the story forward. We also had, I'm talking about sex a lot, but if you've seen the show, it's a big part of the show. And you know, another rule was that we would never do the same. Somebody noticed it, actually. Somebody wrote about this weekend. They said, they seem to be never doing the same sexual act. Like, how do they do it? How do they keep coming up with it? Well, I've done a lot of research.
For science.
I spent a whole life, actually, researching what two men can do together. But, you know, that was we wouldn't do the same thing act. So same thing, same act choice. And, you know, the emotional roller coaster, it's by always coming to the source of tension. What is the source of tension in every scene? Who has power and who doesn't? And you know, just like if you watched Homeland, you always felt that you were being pushed to the ending and pushed to the ending. And so to do that to a love story, I think it helped the love story, I think, have that kind of that feeling.
Mm-hmm. Did you get any negative feedback on the sex scenes? And
you know,
did you just ignore them,
I know
or
it would be such a great story if I had to like fight. It wasn't like that at all. Actually, the Dante Di Loreto, who's the head of Fremantle, which is the studio that with Showtime made the show, said as we were developing the show, he said, you know, Ron, let's make the sex between these two guys so hot that straight men watching the show will want to have gay sex. Now, so far, I haven't been approached, but I am available.
Work evolution. How easy or difficult was it to move from writing screenplays to directing to being a producer? Are they all closely intertwined and it doesn't really?
You know, certainly in television, the reason I much prefer television to film is because the writer is central and remains central in the process in television. And certainly in the era of what has been called prestige television. Although I heard somebody on NPR yesterday say, you know, is Fellow Travelers is it the last gasp of prestige television? There are all these predictions now going on. You know, you solve, both things are about solving problems. You know, and that's all that writers, that's what I do all day. That's what we do as writers all day. Like, you know, how are you going to get that other source to, you know, give you, you know, to back up this thing that you've gotten? That's what we all do. So being a producer is just is that sort of thing. Being a showrunner, being at the center, you know, for me, you know, I learned from my mentor, Jonathan, is that, you know, I had to like lead with love. And that sounds so like touchy-feely. And anyone who knows me knows I'm not a touchy-feely guy. But, you know, everyone had to be, we created an atmosphere of love and respect on the show. You know, and I realized that in some ways that was my most important role, was to just make everybody feel that I appreciated that they were here. I mean, it sounds very simple, but actually, especially when people are like, you're actually frustrated about something, you have to sort of be careful about how you express it. And the other goal of the showrunner, the thing that I was most central to, was it had all been in me for so many years, so there was an authority. So when people are saying, literally, sometimes it comes down to, literally like Matt Bomer at one point, preparing for a sex scene, Ron, socks on or off? Would Hawk keep his socks on? And I said, no way. You know, I just made it up on the spot. But, you know, but there was that sort of reliance on an authority, you know, that somebody would say that we all have to stay in the same direction.
You talked about writers and how important they are. Do you think the strikes accomplished what they needed to? And, you know, why was it such a difficult fight?
Wow. Let me give a sort of, I'm not going to answer that question directly, but I'm going to say that I was in a specific position with the strike. So I was, you know, and I'm a union guy. I'm from coal mining, Pennsylvania. I'm a union guy through and through, and I so applaud and admire my union leaders for what they did. Literally, I haven't read the contract yet, so I don't know. I hope we got what they were asking for. I trust that they did it. I was in a position, though, where I had created a show, and those of us who created it were not able to talk about it, with the WGA being on strike and with SAG being on strike, and that was torturing me. I mean, I thought, like, I spent 11 years making this, and it's going to open in silence. And then luckily, the Writers Guild allowed, even before the strike was over, with certain exceptions, they allowed showrunners to do some talking to the press and promotion, and then the strike ended. So I have my feelings about the strike were like, please, every day was like, please be over, you know, but certainly supporting and walking the picket lines and supporting. You know, that's what I got out of the strike, is I went to the picket lines and realized, like, oh, you know what, I actually like some of these other writers. You know, I'm like, you know, because we're always in competition with each other, and then you're, you know, carrying signs with each other, and you're thinking like, oh, yeah. And there was a little bit of like, oh, I could work with you, you know, a little bit of networking going on.
Right. Someone writes, you have an unlimited budget. I don't know if that's true or not, but
no.
But they say you have a powerful and committed studio. Which LGBTQ plus story do you bring to the screen? Oh, I guess it's if you have this budget, what would you love to do?
Well, first of all, we had a very sufficient budget. I mean, you can see it in the show. I mean, you know, if you stick to the end, you'll see us recreate the National Mall in 1987. That wasn't cheap. You know, Donna Summer is not cheap, you know, to have her to license her music. So I really had everything I needed. So it was a very healthy budget. I'm not quite sure what the question is.
That was my question. What I mean is you have no restrictions at all. What story do you want to bring to the screen if you have no restrictions at all?
Well, the restrictions. The restrictions.
I was saying it's aspirational, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's funny, but a budget wouldn't be a restriction in a way. You know, I think I don't know. That's a very well. This isn't an LGBTQ story, but I hate to give it up because maybe somebody's going to take this story and run with it. Actually, Charlotte. Yeah, you know, people like, no, actually, I'm not even going to say that, actually, because I have a little, what's on the computer now, but it used to be sort of stacked. I have some things that I have been nurturing for a while. And so now that I've, you know, and every career goes up and down, right? At the moment, I'm at the top of the roller coaster. Believe me, a year from now, I'll be down there again. It goes up and down like that. So while I'm at the top, you know, I'm trying to resuscitate some of those. You know, but to be quite honest, I feel so satisfied. I feel I can't repeat Fellow Travelers, and it'll never be repeated, and because it was such an extraordinary experience, you know. The next thing I do is small. Actually, I'm writing something for Amazon right now, and it's much smaller in it's not epic, but it is adventurous. We tell a story backwards, and it's got sex, and it's got people betraying each other and telling lies and hiding, and so yeah, it's kind of stuff. What's that?
And hopefully some Donna Summer.
No, it's all very. I don't think they're the Donna Summer crowd. Yeah, so that's what I really hope to do is sort of continue to challenge myself. You know, how do you tell a story backwards? You know, so that kind of stuff.
I love that. Well, thank you. Well, I would like to thank everyone for coming today and being here with us. Thank you for your engaging conversation. I did want to say a quick thank you to our headliners team, Donna Lajay and Lori Russo, as well as our amazing staff here and Cecily Scott Martin in particular. And I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. You too.